Hello there and welcome to the channel. I'm Dr. Tom Pepper and this video is going to be a follow-up to one of my first videos that was titled How to Argue Critical Thinking. In that video I showed how you use premises and the conclusion to construct your arguments, or the general form that arguments take. And in this video I'm going to zoom in on one area of that I didn't quite cover in enough detail in the first video, which is how you move from the premises to the conclusion. I think the phrase I used in the first video was the premises support the conclusion in the right way. You might still be wondering what that right way is, so here we're going to look at the two processes that take you from the premises to the conclusions, and those are deduction and induction. Induction and deduction are the processes you use to get from the premises to the conclusion, and we'll see how they're different in a moment, and they leave you then with two different kinds of knowledge: inductive knowledge gained through induction, and deductive knowledge gained through deduction. And deductive knowledge is always certain. That's a very small, rare kind of knowledge that's absolutely certain. And induction, then, much more common, we'll go into a lot more length here, is a kind of conclusion that you're pretty sure about, but that the premises don't leave you 100% sure about. Let's define the two key terms here, induction and deduction. I'll cover deduction first, since it's the smaller, less relevant term, really. So to acquire knowledge from deduction means working off the premises to get to a conclusion that is absolutely 100% certain. Induction means moving from premises to reach a conclusion that isn't 100% certain, because the premises haven't conclusively proven that that is the conclusion you need to reach. The third definition that's useful to note here is inference, which is the action of moving from premises to a conclusion. So that's used in induction or deduction. Premises are the things you already know, and the conclusion's the thing you're trying to work out. And again, this is used in sort of common everyday life all the time. So if I'm at home and it's just me and my flatmate in the house and I hear footsteps coming up the stairs, then I can infer from the sound of the footsteps that my flatmate's coming up the stairs. Now that's an inductive inference, so again it could be wrong, and that'd be probably quite horrible if that was wrong and it wasn't my flatmate. But that's the idea. You work out some new knowledge from the knowledge you already have. So deduction, the examples you normally give are mathematics. So for example, if you have 2 plus 2 equals blank, you can use deduction to work out that the blank is a 4, right? Because that's 100% certain. You know that just based on what a 2 is, what a plus is, what an equals is. That blank box must contain a 4. So all mathematical equations to my knowledge are deductive. I could be wrong there, but generally like normal mathematical equations, plus, minuses, times, that's all deductive, right? And you can use deduction in mathematics because the terms are absolutely fixed. A 2 is just a 2, right? It's you can never be unsure about what a 2 is, or maybe it's a 3, or maybe there's some subjective, room for interpretation here. That just never happens in maths. It's objective truth, and so you can use deduction to work out what the conclusions are. If you think about a sum being laid out like an argument, we can see this here. So if premise 1 is 2, and then premise 2 is plus 2, then the conclusion, before, I don't tell you, it's going to be 4, right? So you can 100% certainly work out that the answer there is 4, or the conclusion. And really a conclusion is just premise plus however many other premises equal conclusion. So it's kind of like a mathematical formula anyway, and math's a really good way of exemplifying that deductive process. The other time people say you use deductive knowledge would be through tautologies. So the term bachelor means the same thing as the term unmarried man, supposedly. So if you know that John is a bachelor, you can deductively work out that he is an unmarried man, right? So you don't need to be told specifically John is an unmarried man, you just need to be told that he's a bachelor. And these examples are slightly more contentious than mathematics, because in language there's kind of always some conceptual vagary that people can fiddle around with. So one example I remember hearing was that you might describe the Pope as an unmarried man, but not necessarily a bachelor, since he's not, living in a studio flat and going out drinking every night and carousing or whatever. So those are less certain. If you're looking to explain deduction, it's best to focus on the mathematical examples because they are like 100% certain. But for now, basically everything's questionable in philosophy, but for now, those are good examples. So deduction is absolutely certain, and as a result is a really good way of gaining knowledge, but it's not that common. Most of our knowledge is inductive. So if I tell my friend to come over at 7 p.m. and ring the doorbell 3 times so I know it's them, then it cuts to 7 a.m. and I hear bing, bing, bing at the door. So I think, well, that's probably my friend at the door. And it almost certainly is my friend, but it's not 100% sure in the way that the mathematical conclusion is 100% sure. So I haven't used deduction to reach my conclusion there. I've used induction. I've used the premises, the things I already know, as a good basis for the conclusion my friend is at the door, but it's not 100% certain. Here are some other examples of induction to show you how it works. So you might use induction to tell what the weather's going to be like tomorrow, or which political candidate you should support, or who you think is going to win an athletic event. So it's basically no matter how sure you are of the conclusion, if you're not 100% sure, you're using induction, not deduction. And the knowledge you gain will be inductive knowledge, not deductive knowledge, and so it's never completely certain. One of the problems with inductive reasoning that's of interest to logicians and philosophers is that there really aren't any set rules for induction. We don't actually know, even though the term's been around for a while, we don't really know what good induction is and what bad induction is. So to exemplify this, imagine you're a swan farmer, if such a profession exists. You're a swan farmer like before the age of the internet, right? So all you know is sort of your direct sensory world, and all you know is swans. Your whole life's just dedicated to swans, millions of swans. So you see millions and millions of swans, and they're all white, okay? You might use that information that you've seen millions of white swans, to reach several different conclusions. Those conclusions might be all swans are white. More specifically, they might be there are no black swans, or could even be there are no bright red swans. And I mean naturally occurring, biologically red swans, just to cover my bases there. So what's interesting is that that same set of premises might be used to create inductive inferences. So an inference is when you move from the premises to the conclusion. And it isn't clear just from the process why some of that is a bad induction and why some of it's a good induction, because he's right that there are no red swans, and he's right for the right reasons, right? He's seen a load of swans, enough to convince him there are no red ones. But the farmer is wrong about there being no black swans, because you do get black swans naturally occurring in nature. And he's wrong about all swans being white, right? Even though he's seen loads and loads and loads. So it looks like he's justified in saying there are no red swans based on his experience, or the premises, but he isn't justified in saying that there's no black swans or that all swans are white. Or at least it gets him to the wrong conclusion that time. But you see, from the point of view of the swan farmer, there are no red swans is just as good a claim as there are no black swans. So that's one of the interesting things about induction. We use it all the time to assume things, but sometimes we're wrong. And there's just no way of ever knowing what kind of inductions will take us to good knowledge and what kind of inductions take us to bad knowledge. Because often all the evidence might be pointing in one direction, but then it turns out that whatever direction they're pointing in, that isn't true anyway. The other thing I wanted to briefly mention with induction and deduction, because it does come up occasionally and confuses some people, Sherlock Holmes is often talked about as being like a master of deduction. So what he almost always does is actually induction. So the conclusions that Holmes reaches are almost never 100% certain. So there's one example of a guy comes in and he's got a certain kind of clay on his boots, and Sherlock goes, well, I can tell from the clay on your boots and the fact that there's only one quarry with that kind of clay around, you must have been in that quarry. And the guy's like, oh my God, how do you know? So that isn't deduction, because the conclusion isn't absolutely sure. It's actually just induction. And the thing about Sherlock Holmes is that he just happens to be right about that kind of thing all the time. There's no reason that the guy couldn't have deliberately put that clay on his boots to fool or trick Holmes. But that kind of never happens, or if it does, Holmes figures it out. He's just wildly good at induction, despite the fact that, like we just said, there's no rules to induction. So there shouldn't be any reason for him to be good at it. He's basically just very, very good at guessing things. That's the video for today. Hope you enjoyed. Just a short little follow-up as part of the How to Argue series. And there are other concepts I'd like to cover in the future. But I think next time I'm going to have a look at one of Philosophy Tube's videos that covered abortion, because it has a couple of minor issues with that video that I'd like to address. Thank you very much. If you have already liked the videos or subscribed, that really means a lot to me. I'm really hoping to make a go of this YouTube thing. So it's a great start. Thank you very much. And for this video, please leave a like if you liked it, share it with anyone you think might enjoy it, and do subscribe to the channel if you're new. Should have new videos once or twice a week now. I'm starting to pick up. Until the next video, I'll see you then, and have a good one. Goodbye.